Act like you love me, please, the woman said to a single dad in the park. Then his reaction changed everything. Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. Brooke Palmer was sitting on a bench at Laurelhurst Park in Portland on a Sunday afternoon in late September, trying to read the same page of her book for the third time. And she kept glancing up every few seconds because she had this creeping feeling she was being watched, which turned out to be completely accurate, because her ex-boyfriend Derek was sitting on a bench about 50 feet away, pretending to look at his phone, but definitely staring at her. This was the fourth time in 2 weeks he'd coincidentally shown up wherever she was, and Brooke was running out of patience because she'd broken up with him 4 months ago and had told him at least a dozen times in increasingly firm language that it was over and she didn't want to get back together. But Derek apparently thought persistence was romantic instead of what it actually was, which was creepy and exhausting. The breakup had been a long time coming because Derek had spent their entire year-long relationship slowly making Brooke's world smaller, questioning why she needed to hang out with friends when she had him, checking her phone under the guise of, "We shouldn't have secrets," suggesting she didn't need to dress up for work because who was she trying to impress? And by the time Brooke finally ended it, she'd realized she'd spent 12 months walking on eggshells in her own life. She worked as a veterinary technician at a clinic in Southeast Portland and loved her job even though it meant coming home covered in dog hair and occasionally getting bitten by terrified cats. And Derek had always made comments about how she should find something more professional, which really meant something he could brag about to his friends. And Brooke was so much happier now that she didn't have to justify her choices to someone who'd never actually respected them in the first place. Except Derek wouldn't let her be happy in peace. He kept texting, kept showing up at places he knew she'd be, kept asking for just one more conversation to get closure, even though Brooke had given him closure multiple times in multiple ways. Today, he'd apparently followed her to the park or tracked her location somehow, and Brooke watched him stand up and start walking toward her bench with that determined expression that meant he was about to launch into another speech about how they were good together and she was making a mistake. She looked around desperately for an exit strategy, spotted a guy with a little girl at the playground about 30 feet away, and made a decision that was either brilliant or completely unhinged, depending on how the next 2 minutes went. Julian Cross was pushing his 6-year-old daughter Iris on the swings, and only half paying attention because Iris had been going on the swings for 20 minutes and could basically do it herself at this point. And he was thinking about the dinner shift he had to work tomorrow at the diner, and whether he needed to pick up groceries on the way home when a woman appeared next to him looking absolutely terrified. She was probably around 30 with dark blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing jeans and a sweater, and she leaned in close and said in this quiet, urgent voice, "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I need a huge favor. Can you act like you love me? Please? Just for like 1 minute, there's a guy who won't leave me alone, and I think if he thinks I'm with someone, he'll finally back off." Julian's protective instincts kicked in immediately. Didn't even think about it, just went straight into action mode, and he put his arm around her shoulders and kissed the top of her head like they'd done this 1,000 times before. "There you are, babe. I was wondering where you went. Iris was just asking about you," he said loud enough for whoever was watching to hear, and the woman sagged against him in relief. Iris had stopped swinging and was staring at them with this confused expression. "Daddy, who is that lady?" And Julian gave her a look that said, "Just go with it." "This is my friend Brooke. Remember I told you about her?" Which was a complete lie, but Iris was 6 and thought everything was a game. So she just said, "Oh yeah, hi, Miss Brooke." Brooke waved at Iris and tried to smile, even though Julian could feel her shaking slightly, and a guy was walking toward them now, tall with dark hair and this entitled expression that Julian recognized from every dude who'd ever thought no meant maybe. The guy stopped a few feet away and looked between Julian and Brooke with obvious confusion. "Brooke, I thought we were going to talk." And Brooke's voice came out steadier than Julian expected. "I told you we have nothing to talk about, Derek. I'm here with my boyfriend and his daughter. Please leave me alone." Derek's eyes narrowed and he looked at Julian like he was trying to decide if this was worth challenging. And Julian shifted so he was slightly between Derek and Brooke. "Didn't say anything threatening?" just stood there radiating the kind of energy that said, try me and see what happens. Derek must have decided it wasn't worth the confrontation because he held up his hands in this fake surrender gesture. My bad. I thought you were someone else. Enjoy your day. And he walked away, but not before shooting Brooke a look that suggested this wasn't over. Brooke stayed pressed against Julian's side until Derek was completely out of sight, and then she stepped back and put her hands over her face. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. That was so weird. I just panicked and you were right there. And I didn't know what else to do. Julian could see she was about 2 seconds away from either crying or having a full panic attack, and he guided her to sit on the bench near the playground while Iris went back to the swings. Hey, it's okay. You don't need to apologize. That guy was giving off serious creep vibes. Are you all right? Julian asked, and Brooke nodded, but her hands were still shaking when she pushed her hair back. He's my ex-boyfriend. We broke up 4 months ago and he won't accept it. He keeps showing up everywhere I go and asking for another chance, and I've told him no so many times, but he just doesn't hear it. Julian felt anger spike in his chest because he'd dealt with entitled guys before, and they always thought their feelings mattered more than anyone else's boundaries. Has he threatened you? Because if he has, you need to call the police. This is stalking behavior. Brooke shook her head. He's not dangerous. He's just persistent, and he can't seem to understand that no means no. I thought if he saw me with someone else, he'd finally get it and leave me alone. They sat there for a minute while Julian processed what had just happened, and Iris came running over demanding to know if they could go get ice cream, which was her solution to most of life's problems. Julian looked at Brooke. Do you want to walk with us for a bit? Just in case he's still around? And Brooke looked so relieved she might cry. Are you sure? I don't want to impose. You've already done so much. Julian pulled out his phone. Give me your number. If this guy shows up again and you need backup, call me. I work weird hours at a diner, but I can usually get away for a few minutes. Nobody should have to deal with that alone. Brooke typed her number into his phone with shaking hands. Thank you. Seriously, you have no idea how much this means. Most people would have just walked away. They ended up getting ice cream because Iris wouldn't let it go, and Brooke bought Julian's cone as a thank you, even though he protested, and they sat on a bench outside the ice cream shop while Iris demolished a chocolate cone that was definitely too big for her. So you're a line cook? Brooke asked after Julian mentioned his job, and he nodded. Yeah, at Bernie's Diner, over on Hawthorne. Nothing fancy, but it pays the bills, and the hours work with Iris's school schedule. What about you? Brooke smiled for the first time since the park. I'm a vet tech at Hawthorne Animal Clinic, so we're practically neighbors work-wise. I love it, even though I come home smelling like wet dog most days. Julian laughed. Iris has been begging for a dog for like 2 years. Maybe you can help me figure out what kind doesn't destroy apartments. They talked for another 20 minutes about easy things, Portland rain, good food carts, the nightmare of finding parking anywhere. And by the time they parted ways, Brooke looked less terrified and more just exhausted. Julian watched her walk to her car and made sure she got in safely before loading Iris into his truck. And his daughter immediately asked, Daddy, is Miss Brooke really your girlfriend, or were you pretending? And Julian had to explain in 6-year-old terms that sometimes adults need help, and pretending is okay if it keeps someone safe. Iris seemed satisfied with that answer and went back to talking about her ice cream. But Julian kept thinking about how scared Brooke had looked and how that Derek guy had tried to play it off like he hadn't been harassing her. And he hoped she'd actually call if she needed help again because something told him this wasn't over. Brooke drove home to her apartment feeling like she'd just run a marathon, and she kept checking her rearview mirror to make sure Derek wasn't following her because at this point she wouldn't put it past him. She looked at Julian's number saved in her phone under Julian, Park Hero, and felt this overwhelming gratitude mixed with embarrassment because she'd basically ambushed a complete stranger and asked him to fake a relationship. And instead of calling her crazy or walking away, he just immediately helped without asking questions. She told herself she probably wouldn't need to call him, that Derek had finally gotten the message and would leave her alone now that he thought she'd moved on. But some part of her knew better, and having Julian's number felt like having a lifeline she desperately hoped she wouldn't need. Brooke made it exactly 5 days before she had to use Julian's number, and it happened on a Friday afternoon when she was in the middle of helping a vet tech student learn how to properly restrain a very uncooperative beagle for a blood draw when the clinic receptionist poked her head into the exam room with an apologetic expression. "Brooke, there's a guy in the waiting room asking for you, says he's a friend and just wants to talk for a minute." And Brooke's stomach dropped because she knew exactly who it was without having to ask. She finished up with the beagle, washed her hands, and walked out to the waiting area to find Derek sitting there holding flowers. Like that would somehow make his showing up at her workplace less inappropriate. And when he saw her, he stood up with this smile that probably looked charming to anyone who didn't know better. "Hey, Brooke, I know you're working, but I wanted to apologize for being pushy at the park, and I brought you these to say sorry. Can we grab coffee after your shift?" Derek said like he hadn't completely ignored her boundaries for months, and Brooke felt her co-workers watching this interaction, which made everything 10 times more humiliating. She kept her voice low but firm. "Derek, you need to leave. I'm at work, and this isn't appropriate. We're not getting coffee. We're not getting back together. Please stop doing this." Derek's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "I just want to talk, Brooke. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. You owe me that much after a year together." The phrase, "you owe me," made Brooke's skin crawl because that had been Derek's favorite manipulation tactic, implying she was being unreasonable by having boundaries. And she pulled out her phone and texted Julian before she could second-guess herself. "He's at my work. Can you help?" Julian responded within 30 seconds. "Address? I'm coming now." And Brooke sent him the clinic location and then stood there making awkward small talk with Derek while trying not to panic, telling him she really couldn't talk during work hours and he should leave. Derek was in the middle of some speech about how he'd been thinking about their relationship and realized what he'd done wrong when the clinic door opened and Julian walked in still wearing his kitchen uniform with his name embroidered on the chest. And Brooke had never been so relieved to see someone in her entire life. Julian walked straight up to her and kissed her cheek like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Hey, babe, sorry I'm late. Got held up at work." And then he turned to Derek with this pleasant smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, hey, man, you're that guy from the park, right?" "Derek, I'm Julian, Brooke's boyfriend. Did you need something?" Derek looked between them and Brooke could see him processing this, trying to figure out if it was real or if she'd called in reinforcements, and he ended up just mumbling something about being in the neighborhood and wanting to say hi before leaving the flowers on the counter and walking out. The second he was gone, Brooke sagged against the reception desk. "I'm so sorry, I didn't know who else to call. He just showed up and wouldn't leave, and I panicked." Julian waved off her apology. "You don't need to be sorry. That guy needs to learn what no means. Are you okay?" And Brooke nodded even though she was shaking. And one of the other vet techs came over and said, "Girl, that was your ex. He gives me the creeps. Good thing your boyfriend showed up when he did." And Brooke didn't correct the assumption because it was easier than explaining. That became the pattern over the next 3 weeks. Derek would show up somewhere Brooke was, she'd text Julian, and he'd drop whatever he was doing to come play protective boyfriend until Derek left. It happened at the grocery store on a Tuesday evening, at her apartment building on a Saturday morning, at the coffee shop where Brooke met her friend for brunch, and every single time Julian showed up without complaint, even when it meant leaving work early or rearranging his schedule with Iris. They started hanging out even when Derek wasn't around, just in case he showed up, grabbing coffee between her shifts and his, meeting at the park with Iris, who was absolutely delighted to see Miss Brooke again. And somewhere in all of that, the line between pretending and reality got really blurry in a way that scared Brooke more than Derek's persistence. Iris was the first one to call it out, and it happened when they were at the park for the third weekend in a row, and Brooke had brought dog treats to practice training with a client's puppy she was helping socialize. "Daddy, is Miss Brooke your real girlfriend now, or are you still pretending?" Iris asked while throwing a tennis ball for the puppy, and Julian looked at Brooke with this panicked expression before trying to explain. "We're friends, Iris. I'm just helping her with something. Remember we talked about this." Iris gave him a look that was way too knowing for a 6-year-old. "But you smile different when she's here, like how you smiled at Mommy in the pictures. That's not pretend smiling, that's real smiling. Julian didn't have a good answer for that, and neither did Brooke. So they just changed the subject and pretended the question hadn't landed like a bomb in the middle of their carefully constructed denial. The truth was, Brooke had started having feelings for Julian that went way past gratitude, and she could tell he felt something too based on how long he'd hold her hand when Derek was around, how he'd text her, "Good morning," even on days they weren't meeting up, how he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. But every time Brooke thought about actually dating him for real, she'd remember how Derek had started, all charm and attention, and making her feel special. And then slowly that had turned into control and isolation, and making her question her own judgment about everything. One night after Julian had scared Derek off from her apartment building again, Brooke invited him in for coffee and ended up telling him things she hadn't told anyone, about how Derek used to check her phone and question who she was texting, how he'd get upset if she made plans without including him, how by the end she felt like she needed permission to exist. Julian listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he said quietly, "I'm not him, Brooke. I know you don't know that yet, but I need you to hear it. I would never do that to you." And Brooke felt tears burning because she wanted to believe him, but trusting her own judgment felt impossible. "I don't think I can date anyone, Julian. Not for real. Derek messed me up, and I don't know how to fix it. Every time I think about being in a relationship, I just feel trapped." Julian reached across the table and took her hand. "Then we don't date. We just keep doing this, hanging out, being friends. And if you ever feel ready for more, you tell me. But I'm not going anywhere either way. You don't have to be ready for anything you don't want." They agreed that night to keep things exactly as they were, just friends helping each other out. And both of them knew it was a lie, but neither was ready to admit it. The situation with Derek came to a head on a Thursday evening when Brooke and Julian were having dinner at a casual Thai place near his apartment. And they'd brought Iris, who was coloring on the kids' menu and telling them about a drama with her friend at school. They were mid-meal when Derek walked in with a group of people, spotted them, and his expression shifted to something Brooke couldn't quite read, and she felt Julian tense beside her. Derek didn't come over, but he kept looking at their table, and Brooke noticed him watching how she and Julian interacted, how there was space between them in the booth, how they weren't holding hands or doing any of the couple things they did when Derek was actively around, and she saw the moment Derek's expression changed from jealous to suspicious. After Derek and his group left, Julian said, "That felt different. Did you see how he was looking at us?" And Brooke nodded because she'd noticed too. "He's trying to figure out if we're real or not. We probably weren't acting coupley enough." Julian's jaw tightened. "I don't like that he's watching you that closely. This has gone past annoying and into actual stalking territory. Maybe we should file a police report." Brooke wanted to argue that it wasn't that serious, but even she was starting to feel like Derek's behavior had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. And the fact that he was analyzing her relationship to decide if it was real enough to back off felt like a different kind of violation. 2 days later, Derek showed up at the vet clinic again during Brooke's lunch break, and this time she didn't call Julian. She handled it herself because she was exhausted and angry and done playing games. Derek cornered her in the parking lot with this triumphant expression. "He's not really your boyfriend, is he, Brooke? I've been watching you two, and you don't act like you're together. You asked some random guy to scare me off, and now you're stuck pretending. Just admit it so we can stop this and talk for real." Something in Brooke just snapped. All the fear and anxiety from months of Derek not listening turned into pure fury, and she stepped forward instead of back. "You want the truth, Derek? Fine. Whether Julian is my boyfriend or not doesn't matter. What matters is that I don't want you. I haven't wanted you for months, and if you don't leave me alone, I'm filing a restraining order. Is that clear enough for you?" Derek looked genuinely shocked for the first time since the breakup, like he'd finally heard her, and he took a step back with his hands up. Okay, I get it. You've made yourself clear. I won't bother you anymore." He walked away and Brooke stood in the parking lot shaking from adrenaline, and she texted Julian, "I think Derek finally got the message. I told him to leave me alone, or I'd get a restraining order, and he actually listened." Julian responded immediately, "Are you okay? Do you need me to come over?" And Brooke looked at that text for a long minute before responding, "Yeah, but not because of Derek. We need to talk." Julian showed up at Brooke's apartment 30 minutes after she texted him, and when she opened the door, he looked worried in that way that meant he'd probably broken a few traffic laws getting there. "What happened? Are you okay? Did Derek do something?" he asked before he was even fully inside, and Brooke shook her head while closing the door behind him. "I'm fine. Derek's actually gone. I think I finally got through to him, but that's kind of the problem." Julian looked confused as he followed her to the couch, and Brooke sat down with her hands twisted together, trying to figure out how to say what she needed to say without sounding like a complete jerk. "You've been showing up for me for almost a month now, dropping everything whenever I texted, playing my fake boyfriend, spending time with me and Iris, and I'm so grateful for all of it. But Derek's not an issue anymore, which means you don't have to keep pretending." She watched Julian's face shift from confused to something that looked like hurt, and he sat down on the other end of the couch, putting space between them that felt deliberate. "So what? Now that you don't need protection, you're done with me? That's what this is?" And his voice came out harder than Brooke had ever heard it, and she immediately tried to backtrack. "No, that's not what I mean. I just don't want you to feel obligated to keep this up when the reason for it is gone. You have your own life, and Iris and I've been taking up so much of your time." Julian leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "Brooke, do you seriously think I've been doing this out of obligation? That I've been showing up and spending every free minute with you because I felt bad for you?" The way he said it made Brooke realize she'd completely misread the situation, and she felt her stomach drop. "What if I don't want to stop?" Julian said, and his voice got quieter. "What if I've been looking for excuses to see you even when Derek wasn't around? What if the best part of my week is when you text me good morning, or when Iris asks if Miss Brooke is coming to the park? I wasn't pretending, Brooke, not for a long time, and if you can't see that, then maybe I haven't been clear enough." Brooke felt tears starting, and she tried to blink them back. "Julian, I can't. I want to, but I'm so messed up from Derek. He made me question everything about myself, my judgment, my choices, and I'm terrified of getting into another relationship and having it turn into that again." Julian moved closer and took her hands. "I'm not him. I know you've heard that before, but I need you to actually believe it. I would never check your phone or question your friends or make you feel small. That's not who I am." Brooke pulled her hands back and stood up because sitting that close to him was making it impossible to think clearly. "But how do I know that? Derek was perfect at first too, charming and attentive and making me feel special. And then it changed so slowly I didn't notice until I was completely isolated. What if I can't trust myself to see the signs?" Julian stood too but didn't move toward her. "Then don't trust yourself yet. Trust that I'll be patient while you figure it out. Trust that I'm not going anywhere whether we date or stay friends. Trust that my feelings aren't conditional on you being ready right this second." Brooke felt something break open in her chest. "What about Iris? She already thinks we're together. She asks about me constantly. I don't want to hurt her if I can't do this. She's been through enough with her mom leaving." Julian's expression softened. "Iris already loves you, Brooke. She asks to see you, even when there's no Derek excuse. She draws you pictures and saves them to give you when we hang out. And yeah, if this doesn't work out, it'll be hard for her. But she's also learning that sometimes taking risks is worth it even if they're scary." Brooke wiped her eyes and tried to steady her breathing. "I need time, Julian. I need to work through the Derek stuff. Maybe talk to a therapist. Figure out how to trust myself again. Can you wait for that?" Julian closed the distance between them and pulled her into a hug. "I've been waiting since the day you asked me to act like I loved you. A little longer won't kill me. Take all the time you need." 3 months went by, and Brooke started seeing a therapist who specialized in recovery from controlling relationships. And she worked through all the ways Derek had slowly eroded her confidence and autonomy. Learned to recognize red flags, practice setting boundaries without feeling guilty. Julian kept showing up exactly like he'd promised. No pressure, no ultimatums, just consistent presence in her life and Iris's life. And Brooke found herself falling for him in this slow, careful way that felt nothing like the rush she'd had with Derek. They went to Iris's school winter concert together, and Brooke's heart did something funny when Iris waved at both of them from the stage. They baked cookies at Julian's apartment, and ended up in a flower fight that left all three of them covered in white powder. And every time Julian said goodnight without pushing for more, Brooke fell a little harder. It was early February when Brooke finally worked up the courage to have the conversation she'd been building toward for weeks, and she asked Julian to meet her at Laurelhurst Park at the same bench where she'd first ambushed him 4 months ago. It was a cold Saturday afternoon with that Portland drizzle that never really commits to being rain, and Julian showed up looking nervous, like he thought maybe this was the conversation where she told him she couldn't do it after all. They sat down and Brooke took a breath. "Remember when I sat on this bench and asked you to act like you loved me?" And Julian nodded. "Kind of hard to forget. That was one of the weirder things anyone's ever asked me to do in a public park." Brooke smiled. "I've been thinking about that day a lot, about how you didn't hesitate or ask questions. You just immediately helped a complete stranger, and that says everything about who you are." Julian reached for her hand. "Where are you going with this, Brooke?" And she squeezed his fingers. "I'm saying I'm ready, or at least I'm ready to try. I've worked through a lot of the Derek stuff with my therapist, and I feel like I can trust my own judgment again. And my judgment says you're one of the best people I've ever met, and I want to actually date you for real this time." Julian's face broke into this huge grin. "Yeah? You're sure? Because I meant what I said about being patient. You don't have to rush into anything you're not ready for." Brooke leaned in and kissed him, soft and quick but real. "I'm sure I want this. I want you and Iris and whatever this becomes. No more pretending." They dated for real after that, and it was different from anything Brooke had experienced before. Julian asked her opinion on things instead of telling her what to think, encouraged her to make plans with friends, never once checked her phone or questioned where she was, and when Brooke had moments of panic because old habits die hard, Julian would just calmly remind her that she was allowed to have boundaries and autonomy, and he wasn't going anywhere. Iris was thrilled when they told her Miss Brooke was officially her dad's girlfriend now, declared herself the reason they got together since she'd been the one to point out that pretend smiling wasn't pretend, and started planning their wedding even though both adults told her to slow down. 6 months after that first park bench conversation, Brooke and Julian were back at Laurelhurst on a Sunday afternoon with Iris running around the playground, and they were sitting on their bench watching her play when Brooke said, "I never thanked you properly for that first day, for just immediately helping without making me explain myself." Julian put his arm around her. "You thanked me like 50 times that day, plus you bought me ice cream. I was well compensated." Brooke leaned into him. "I asked you to act like you loved me, and you said yes without hesitation. When did it stop being acting for you?" Julian was quiet for a second. "Honestly, probably that first day when you were so grateful and relieved, and I realized I wanted to keep making you feel safe. The acting part lasted maybe an hour tops." Iris came running over, demanding they come push her on the swings, and as they walked toward the playground, Brooke thought about how 6 months ago she'd been sitting on that bench, feeling trapped and scared. And a complete stranger had saved her not just from Derek, but from the version of herself that believed she deserved to feel small. Julian hadn't just pretended to love her that day in the park. He'd shown her what real love actually looked like, patient and consistent and never asking her to be anything other than exactly who she was. And Brooke had learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help from a stranger. And sometimes that stranger becomes the safest place you've ever known. Sometimes love starts with a desperate request in a park and a stranger who doesn't ask questions before helping. Sometimes healing looks like learning to trust yourself again with someone who never makes you doubt your worth. And sometimes the person who agrees to pretend ends up being the most real thing in your life. Brooke had asked Julian to act like he loved her to escape someone who claimed to love her, but only wanted to control her. And Julian had said yes and kept saying yes every day after, until the acting became truth and the pretending became promise. If this story reminded you that real love never makes you feel small and asking for help is strength, not weakness, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and whether you believe in park bench miracles. We love hearing your stories. Thanks for being here with us. And remember that sometimes the person who shows up when you need them most isn't the person you expected. And that's exactly how it's supposed to be.